Hi, everybody. Today I'm going to talk about chapters 4 and 5 in The Art of the Relationship by Gary Landreth. So just give me a second. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you. So this is two separate PowerPoints. And we're going to start with chapter 4, A View of Children. So this is Gary Landreth's approach to working with children. So, a good rule of thumb to start us off is that what's most important about children can be learned only from children. So we really want to get to know the child more so than even the parent. Children bring to the relationship with the therapist a rich tapestry of emotional possibilities from which they weave the intricacies of their personalities. The direction these emotional possibilities take is affected by the person of the therapist, the kinds of responses the therapist makes, and what children sense in the therapist. So we're going to talk a lot more about facilitative responses, the way to be in the playroom, and so that we can allow the world of the child to emerge as fully authentically as possible, so that we don't influence in negative ways. So Gary Landreth's tenets for relating to children are that children are not miniature adults. So sometimes it's natural for us as adults to kind of place these expectations on children that are not necessarily realistic. We expect them to not only behave in certain ways, but to think certain ways or to approach the world in certain ways, and that's just not real. Children are people. So sometimes I think people do lose sight of the fact that children are people. They don't treat them with respect, or they don't know how to talk to them in ways that are maybe facilitative. So children are unique and worthy of respect. Children are resilient. So even children who come from backgrounds that maybe are negative, or they've experienced some struggles in life, they can bounce back. Children have an inherent tendency toward growth and maturity. So children, just like people, are always self-striving to become the best versions of themselves that they can be, whatever that means for them. And they're growing every single day, and they're trying to mature every day. Children are capable of positive self-direction. Children's natural language is play. Children have the right to remain silent. So we don't want to place our expectations on them in the playroom to talk, because they're telling us so much through their play. We are not going to force them to speak to us. Children will take the therapeutic experience where they need to go. So a lot of times as therapists, we have expectations, we have goals, the parents have goals. They want them to change X, Y, and Z behavior, or do certain things a certain way. And the child-centered approach just honors that the child will lead and guide the therapist in a way that is right for them. So they're going to grow at their own pace in ways that are appropriate for them. And children's growth cannot be sped up. So trying to force it, trying to push the goals are not helpful. So children are resilient. They have the ability to heal. They're all different, and they are not merely products of their environment. So this is how we can look at different people and know that even though they've been through maybe some horrific traumatic experiences, they come out on the other side and they're stronger than they were before. They are maybe more kind, more successful than someone who hasn't experienced as much. And that has to do with resilience. So how you can manage negative experiences and grow positively from that. And signs of resilience include self-direction, a high self-regard, inner motivation, and a sense of personal identity. That's how we can tell our children are resilient. Children are fun. They are joyful, and they approach life with exuberance. They are deprived of joy when they're rushed to complete tasks and hurried to grow up, which I think is a real challenge, because I know that as parents and teachers, we have all these objectives that we have to meet every day. We need them to learn certain things in order to get them where they need to go. even just the hustle and bustle of a daily routine for parents can be a real challenge, because children have to get to school on time. They have to get wherever they're going. They need to eat. They need to do all of these things within a time frame. And that can really, at times, stunt the individuality of the child, but that's okay. We have to live within the constraints of our world. But in the playroom, that's our opportunity to let children slow down, let them grow at their own pace, to give them the space to grow in the ways that work best for them on their time frame. So that's why our relationship is a little bit different. Trust is really important. So children are trusting and therefore vulnerable, which is why it's really important that we do what we say and mean what we say. Don't make promises you can't keep, because trust is really important, and adults need to uphold levels of trust with children. And we can break that trust easily if we aren't careful about what we say and what we do. And children live in the present. They're not thinking about the past or the future. Sometimes they work through the past or the future through play, but they're always acting that out in a concrete way through the play in the moment. Some children are like popcorn and some are like molasses. So children already have everything they need to grow into what they're meant to become. We as therapists must be supportive that some children are like popcorn, fast-paced, exuberant, moving quickly from task to task and place to place. And some are like molasses, moving slowly on the outside, but processing and functioning well. Some children are like mushrooms, seeming to mature overnight and blossom. And some are like orchids. It could take 7 to 12 years to bloom. The child therapist adapts to them all. So this child-centered belief really asserts that everyone has all the tools already inside of them to grow. As therapists, we facilitate a relationship that allows for optimal growth, but they're going to do the heavy lifting and the work. And the way that they're going to do that could be like molasses. Some could be like popcorn. Some might grow overnight. We have to be accepting and have unconditional positive regard for every type of child. Okay, so that's it for chapter 4. I'm going to go ahead and share with you chapter 5. Just a second. All right. Here we go. All right. Okay. So now we're really going to break down what child-centered play therapy really is. So first of all, I just want to share with you that this is a theory. And it's based on, Carl Rogers' theory. This is one way to approach working with children. It is the most researched, and we have the most data about the effectiveness of this approach, and the research has shown that it is effective. But there are various types of play therapy that are not child-centered. There's Adlerian, cognitive behavioral, all different variations of play therapy, but what we're talking about in this chapter is child-centered play therapy approach. So the theory of personality consists, and another disclaimer, that's kind of what we're going to be talking about this whole class. So you're going to learn one approach to working with children. That does not mean that you can't vary your approach or that there aren't other ways of working with kids, but this is the most researched and kind of the most popular way of working with kids, particularly if you're going to strictly adhere to play therapy. So if you have an interest in becoming a play therapist, this is really the core of the training. In this class, you're obviously getting an overview, so you're not going to walk away feeling like a very skilled and well-trained play therapist, but you're going to understand the basics, and you're going to have an idea of why there are certain approaches used in this theory. And I think it'll help you as you're moving on in your work with children. It'll give you some tools. So back to the theory of personality. The theory of personality consists of the person, the phenomenal field, and the self. So the person consists of thoughts, feelings, physical being, and behaviors. The child is constantly reacting to a dynamic and changing environment and does so as an organized whole. The changes in environment impact the person, and the person impacts the environment. The person is always striving towards self-actualization, and this means growth, maturity, independence, and enhancement as a person. This is goal-directed and based on the needs experienced in the child's environment. The phenomenal field, so just to summarize, the person is all that encompasses the child. Thoughts, feelings, behaviors, the person of the child. And it's constantly changing dependent on the environment or the phenomenal field. So the phenomenal field consists of everything the child experiences, both internal and external, including thoughts and experiences. So this takes the person and puts it in an environment and encompasses all of it. The phenomenal field forms the basis for how the child perceives their world. It's the unconscious and conscious and internal and external. And the phenomenal field is constantly changing and in motion. And then we have the self. So the self is the totality of the child's self-perception. So this is like self-esteem, view of self, the way the child views his or herself. So the child's self is the center of an ever-evolving and changing phenomenal field, as we just described. So the phenomenal field involves the environment, the family, thoughts and feelings. So it's kind of everything. As the child interacts with the environment, they understand themselves as separate and gain perceptions and views of self from their environments. The child's behavior, so this is big. So as the child interacts with the environment, they start to view themselves in a certain way. Children really build their self-esteem based on the perceptions of their caregivers, and teachers and adults in their world of them. So the views of others impact their self-esteem, their competence and ability to kind of conquer their environment or feel competent and successful in their environment impacts their self-esteem. And basically, all the interactions they have in their phenomenal field impact their view of themselves. The child's behavior is generally consistent with their view of self. Children internalize the perceptions of their caregivers. So just like I was talking about before. So if the caregiver feels negatively toward them, they're going to internalize that view. So as play therapists, we have to really work to have unconditional positive regard for our clients because they are going to internalize that view and probably pick up on it, even if we're not, verbalizing it. So children internalize the perceptions of their caregivers. If a parent or teacher labels them as bad, that's how a child will view his or herself. So that's why it's so important, for all of us to treat children well, but particularly as the counselor in a play therapy relationship to have a positive view that we're having towards a child and exuding. Change occurs in therapy because the therapist genuinely accepts, believes in, and thinks highly of the child. So you need to work on yourself in order to be a good therapist, because if you don't genuinely like the child, that may come across. And in this theory, you cannot not genuinely accept the child and be effective at the same time, because the vehicle for change in this theory is the relationship. And the relationship is built on genuineness, trust, and positive regard. A child-centered view of personality and behavior. So the idea is that every child exists in a continually changing world of experience in which the child is the center. The child reacts as an organized whole to this field as it is experienced and perceived. The perceptual field is, for the child, reality. As the child develops and interacts with the environment, a portion of the child's total private world or perceptual field gradually becomes recognized as me, differentiated as the self. The child forms concepts about him or herself, about the environment, and about him or herself in relation to the environment. So just to break that down, children are at the center of an environment, which is the whole world around them. the child reacts to that environment, and they view this environment and the world in which they are the center as reality. As they interact with the environment and the people in it, they start to view themselves as the self-concept starts to emerge, and they see themselves as differentiated, and they start to internalize and understand themselves in relation to the world and develop ideas about themselves, self-esteem, etc. The child has a basic tendency to strive, to actualize, to maintain and enhance the experiencing self. So that's our natural tendency. Our natural tendency is to grow, to become more mature, to become better versions of ourselves. The resulting behavior is basically the goal-directed, emotionally influenced attempt of the child to satisfy needs as experienced in the field as perceived. Therefore, the best vantage point for understanding the child's behavior is from the internal frame of reference of the child. So as therapists, we are going to understand the self of the child that the child is exuding by attempting to understand that child from that child. So the bulk of our information we're going to get from the child in the playroom in our relationship. And that the idea is that we all are goal-directed, striving, and generally moving toward better versions of ourselves. And as therapists, we need to believe that and trust in that process. And that's how we're able to be non-directive, because this is a very non-directive theoretical approach. And the way that we can be non-directive is our belief in the child to grow. Rogers has 9 propositions, and he states that the child is viewed as being the best determiner of a personal reality. The child's perceptual field is reality. So we're never going to say that the child's view is wrong. We're going to understand the reality of the child through the eyes of the child. The child behaves as an organized whole. The child is striving toward independence, maturity, and enhancement of self. They are goal-directed in an effort to satisfy their needs. Children are behaviorally influenced by feelings that affect rationality. They behave in ways that are consistent with the self-concept. So if they're acting out, it may be that they have low self-esteem or they're not feeling great about themselves. Responding to threat by becoming behaviorally rigid. So sometimes children will react in behaviorally rigid ways when they're not safe. And by admitting into awareness experiences that are inconsistent with the self is free from threat. So when the child is able to bring awareness to the experiences, maybe a trauma or something bad that happened that don't fit with their view of self, then they can be free from threat. That's just like an adult processing through negative feelings or something that happened in their life that was not positive. They can be free from that once they've processed through it, accepted it, and let it go. Key concepts of child-centered play therapy include, child-centered play therapy is built on the philosophy that children are self-striving and constructively self-directing. It's based on an understanding of the observable natural forward movement of the human organism through developmental stages of growth that are normally progressive and always geared toward maturity. This tendency is innate and not externally motivated or taught. So again, as therapists, we are not there to teach. We're not there to set their goals for them. We are not there to guide. We are there to accept and provide a positive relationship and toys in a playroom as a means for expression to facilitate that growth and expression. But the child is the one that's moving toward self-actualization. It is the therapist's job to accept and provide the circumstances for optimal growth, not to set the goals or push them in that direction. Adjustment and maladjustment. So when the individual develops sufficient self-confidence, consciously and purposefully to direct his behavior by evaluation, selectivity, and application to achieve his ultimate goal in life, self-realization, then he seems to be well adjusted. So the idea basically is that we're all self-striving, we're all moving towards the best versions of ourselves. And when we don't have anything getting in the way of that, we're going to naturally move in that direction. On the other hand, when the individual lacks sufficient self-confidence to chart his course of actions openly, seems content to grow in self-realization vicariously rather than directly, so that's like a lack of motivation, or does little or nothing about channeling this drive in more constructive and productive directions, then he's said to be maladjusted. The individual's behavior is not consistent with the inner concept of the self, which the individual has created in his attempt to achieve self-realization. The further apart the behavior and the concept, the greater the degree of maladjustment. So the idea being that if we have this ideal self and it's out here and we're behaving in ways that are not in alignment with that, then maybe we're in maladjustment. While the human organism is striving to achieve self-actualization, if the concept of self is hurt by too many obstacles, the child will experience maladjustment. So even though we believe that children are resilient, sometimes too much is too much. People sometimes experience things that are horrific and tragic. And at times that might hurt the child's view of him or herself and can, turn into maladjustment. Maladjustment occurs from incongruence between what the child is experiencing and the concept of self. And incongruence between the child's self-concept and experience results in incongruence in behavior. So again, the way the child views themselves versus their experiences in life can result in incongruence in behavior. And children can safely experience and recreate their experiences in the playroom with an accepting therapist. In doing so, they have room to work toward congruence. So let's say a child has gone through something challenging in life. They may act out that trauma. So let's say they got into a serious car accident. They might very literally work through cars crashing in the sandbox. Or maybe they build a big tower and they bust it all down over and over in a thematic type situation. And it sort of aligns symbolically with what they've experienced. That's their way of concretely working through their feelings and trying to cognitively understand what they've been through and emotionally. And as therapists, if we're there reflecting feelings and content, we can help sort of validate what they're going through and help them concretely process their experiences. So, in doing so, they can make sense of their world and come to emotional congruence and work through the feelings that they're having. So the therapeutic conditions for growth. How do we help a child grow? Well, we help a child grow through non-possessive warmth. We are warm, we are caring, and we are accepting. And the way that we do that is we work on ourselves. So if I can accept myself, I can genuinely accept others. And when I accept children, I allow them to self-actualize. So remember that self-esteem is built on the adults and people in their lives. So if we provide that unconditional positive regard and acceptance for the child, they can start to internalize that and accept themselves. Genuineness is a very important therapeutic condition for growth. So being genuine or real implies that the therapist possesses a high degree of self-understanding and self-acceptance and is congruent in what he feels and what he expresses in the relationship. So saying, "Oh, honey, I'm sorry you're sad about that. It's going to be okay." That's not congruent because we don't know that it's actually going to be okay in their life. But saying, "I can tell you feel really sad about that." That's reflecting their feeling. That's acknowledging what they're trying to express. It helps them feel heard and it helps them feel validated. And you wouldn't tell a child, "I can't wait to see you again," if you don't feel that way. You can be warm and accepting, but you have to be genuine as well. We need empathy. So to sense the client's, the way that Rogers describes this is to sense the client's private world as if it were your own. So you're feeling kind of the feelings that they're feeling, but without ever losing that as if quality. So there's a separateness. You can imagine what they're feeling. You may even be feeling some of the feelings, but you don't inhabit their world. So this is empathy, and it is essential to therapy. The therapist does not try to comfort the child or provide false hope. So, for example, if the child says, "My mom doesn't love me," and they're feeling sad, the wrong response would be, "Oh, she sure does love you. You know that. You know she loves you." The correct response, because first of all, you don't know their mom, and you can imagine that the mother loves the child, but you don't know exactly what that mother feels, and you don't know how that child feels. It actually takes away from their experience because you're negating their feelings. So if they're saying, "I'm feeling sad," and you say, "Oh, no, you're not," you'll pick yourself back up. You're basically dismissing how they feel in that moment. So we don't want to dismiss how they feel. So the correct response would be, "You feel hurt right now. I hear sadness in your voice when you said that." Or, "You feel as though she doesn't love you." Or, "You're angry and you feel like your mother doesn't love you." Reflect feelings for a child just as you would for an adult, because you wouldn't say that to an adult. If an adult came in and said, "My mother doesn't love me," you wouldn't say, "Oh, sure she does." You would say, "Wow, that must be really difficult for you to say out loud." All right? So those are the types of responses you're going to provide for children. And empathy allows us to feel, so by not allowing those feelings to exist, you tell a child it's not okay to feel pain or to deny very real painful feelings. So I think this is something we do a lot to children. We tell them what their reality is so frequently that we dismiss how they're actually feeling. And when we dismiss how they're feeling, we're telling them it's not okay to feel that emotion. And I think that's a great disservice to do to children. So we want to acknowledge how they're feeling. And empathy allows us to feel some of the feelings the child experiences in that as-if way. So the therapeutic relationship. Important things to remember are to let the child be. Accept them for who and what they are completely in those moments. Acceptance, appreciation, and mutual respect are key. You're going to let the child lead. Do not have expectations. If you're too goal-driven or you're focused on the problem, you're not focused on the child. And the therapist is present, but always guided by the child. I must be still within myself and see the child. I must be still and listen to the child. I must be still and make contact with the imagination of the child. I must be still and follow the lead of the child. I must be still and experience the child. I must be still within myself and touch the hidden person of the child. And I must be still within myself and wait for the child. So, we're not solving problems. We're not fixing things. We're not creating goals and fixing them and pushing them in the direction of their goals. You are seeing, listening, making contact, following, and experiencing the child. You are waiting for the child. You are patient. The child-centered therapist is extremely patient. The child-centered therapist trusts the process and trusts that through the relationship, the child will make growth and progress. The child-centered therapist is not pushing the child in any direction. The therapist is genuinely interested in the child and develops a warm and caring relationship. The therapist experiences unqualified acceptance of the child and does not wish that the child were different in some way. The therapist creates a feeling of safety and permissiveness in the relationship so the child feels free to explore and express themselves completely. The therapist is sensitive to the child's feelings and reflects those feelings in a manner that the child develops self-understanding. So when we reflect those feelings and content in session, it helps the child feel validated in what they're feeling. It helps them learn and it helps them feel understood. The therapist is sensitive to the child's feelings and reflects those feelings in such a manner that so we already said that, sorry. The therapist believes deeply in the child's capacity to act responsibly, unwaveringly reflects the child's ability to solve personal problems, and allows the child to solve problems. The therapist trusts the child's inner direction, allows the child to lead in all areas of the relationship, and resists any urge to direct the child's play or conversation. So in child-centered therapy, it is non-directed. The child leads completely. The therapist appreciates the gradual nature of the therapeutic process and does not attempt to hurry the process. The therapist establishes only those therapeutic limits necessary to anchor the relationship to reality and which help the child accept personal and appropriate relationship responsibility. So, as permissive as this approach is, and as client-centered and non-directed as it is, that does not mean that the child is without limits. So as therapists, we are going to set limits, but only minimally, to help the child, accept personal and appropriate responsibility, to keep everyone safe. And we'll talk about that a little more in the next couple chapters. A good rule of thumb is when you focus on the problem, you lose sight of the child. That is a really good one to think about. When you focus on the problem, you lose sight of the child. Is that not the case with all of us? You can look at my negative points. There are plenty. I am a flawed human, as we all are. But if you only look at my negatives or where I need to grow or how I need to change, you're not seeing me as a person. You're seeing one aspect of me and the most negative aspect of me. You're missing out on all the good stuff, okay? So that's something to keep in mind. That's how we need to view these children. I know sometimes it's very easy for us to want to fix, to want to change, to want to, meet our objectives, because that's what parents will come to us for. To fix them, to change them, to get them to follow the rules, whatever it may be. But that's not our job. Our job is to help them self-strive, self-develop, and grow. And the only way we can do that is by pure unconditional acceptance. And we cannot unconditionally accept a child if we're only focusing on the problem. The facts about a child do not tell very much about the person of a child. So, we can get the backstory from the parent, and that's great. We need to do that. We need to get as much information as we can. But that's not our main source of information. The child will teach us about who they are, and they will give us the information we're looking for more than anyone else. We need to focus on the child and the relationship. In child-centered play therapy, the relationship, not the utilization of toys or the application of techniques or the interpretation of behavior, is the key to growth. Therefore, the relationship is always focused on the present living experience of the child. So we're going to focus on the person of the child rather than the problem, the present rather than the past, feelings rather than thoughts or acts, understanding rather than explaining. I want to go back to the feelings part. So you can look at a behavior and go, wow, what a terror. That was destructive. Or you can focus on the fact that that child was feeling angry. That child was feeling frustrated. That child wanted to feel in control or out of control. Okay? We want to focus on understanding rather than explaining. So we're curious instead of teachers. We are learning from the child more than the child is learning from us. We are accepting rather than correcting. It's the child's direction rather than the therapist's instruction, and it's the child's wisdom rather than the therapist's knowledge. The key facilitative elements in the relationship which are growth promoting for the child can be summed up in the following therapeutic dimensions in the play therapy relationship. So, belief in the child, respect for the child, acceptance of the child, hearing the inner child, acceptance of the child's will, focusing on the child's needs, freedom for the child to set his own direction, opportunity for the child to make choices, and respect for the child's boundaries, and patience with the process. The objectives are, in child-centered play therapy, are to help the child develop a more positive self-concept, assume greater self-responsibility, become more self-directing, become more self-accepting, become more self-reliant, engage in self-determined decision-making, experience a feeling of control, become sensitive to the process of coping, develop an internal source of evaluation, become more trusting of himself, and it is impossible to establish a relationship with a problem. So that's why we are not focusing on the problem, we're focusing on the child. And you will see more and more as we unroll the facilitative responses and ways to approach the relationship, how these objectives really come through. Because it really is about helping the child be self-directing and reliant and not overly dependent. And you'll see that in the way that we respond to the child as we work through that. And what do the children learn in child-centered therapy? They learn to respect themselves. They learn that their feelings are acceptable, that it's okay to feel. They learn to express their feelings responsibly. They learn to assume responsibility for themselves. They learn to be creative and resourceful in confronting their problems. They learn self-control and self-direction. They gradually learn at a feeling level to accept themselves. And they learn to make choices and to be responsible for those choices. And multicultural child-centered therapy. So this is an approach that can be used with all cultures. There actually has been research on a variety of different populations, and it seems to be effective with all of those populations. And the reason is that it's an inherently multicultural theory. So you're trying to understand the whole child from the worldview of the child, which includes the uniqueness of the child's culture. So you're not having judgments, you're just accepting the child for who they are and what they show you about who they are in their culture. And acceptance, positive regard, not providing solutions, answers, or imposing values leaves room for everyone. So those are things just to consider and remember. And we'll talk more about research in chapter 17. But one thing I will note about that is that if you're working with a multicultural population, you need to have multicultural toys. So Eurocentric American toys are not going to be the most appropriate when working with diverse populations from different backgrounds. So we want to be mindful of that and have reflective toys that are reflective of the cultural landscape of your clientele, if possible. All right, so that's all I have for you for chapters 4 and 5. So I hope that you have somewhat of a clearer understanding of beliefs about the child in child-centered therapy, but then also our approach to working with children. And we're going to keep plowing through, and I will see you soon for chapters 6, 7, and 8. All right, thank you so much, and have a good day.